Success in real estate means an accepted offer. Now, an accepted offer generally requires some type of negotiation between the buyer side and the seller side of the transaction. But successful negotiations don't happen when the buyer says, "There's the house I want, let's start." Or successful negotiations don't begin when an offer arrives on the seller's kitchen table from a prospective buyer. It all happens in our initial meetings. With the buyers, it's really about setting their expectations up so they understand the market conditions they're trying to buy a house in. At the same time, if you happen to be the listing agent and you're with a seller and they're deciding to put their home on the market, it's important that you manage their expectations so they too understand the local market conditions and what's happening. For instance, if we find ourselves in a buyer's market, that means there's lots of properties for sale and the sellers need to be flexible. Let me give you a real life example. Let's pretend it's 2009, 1 year after the Great Recession, and you're a real estate agent in Nevada, Arizona, or Florida. Just about every second house on the street is for sale. And if you're on an appointment with a seller, how must you tune up that seller to make sure, if they're serious about selling their house, that they price it properly and they bring the right terms and they demonstrate the right flexibility? You really need to take a look at the market and decide where will you position that house so that the seller gets the job done, that you get the job done, and the seller gets an offer they're happy with. At the same time, if we're in a market that's undersupplied, like maybe the market of 2020, most cities across North America in the year of 2020 didn't have enough inventory. So we saw multiple offers. We saw people paying above asking price. It was really a challenging market in a lot of ways for somebody who wanted to buy a house. Now, granted, it was driven by low interest rates, and I get all of that. But at the same time, if you want a buyer to buy a house in a market that's undersupplied, you got to manage their expectations right from the beginning, not when they pick out a house. Because when they pick out a house, they're going to obviously want to try to get a good deal. That means they're going to come in less than asking on it, and they're going to want to negotiate. The problem is there's 20 other people that want to buy a house in that market. So really what you want to do is set everybody's expectations in the right sequence, in the right order, so when they see the right house or they get the right offer, they're going to have the right attitude. Now, I was working for a client down in Colorado, and their market was really undersupplied. And their leadership was getting frustrated because the salespeople were out working and they were out showing properties, and they'd see something they'd like and they'd get beat out in multiples. And this was happening over and over and over again. A lot of times the agents had to sell the same buyer 2 or 3 times till they finally got a house. So leadership got together and said, let's come up with some strategy. Let's come up with something to give our agents a leg up, to give them a little advantage. So in the brainstorming session, they came up with what they called a 5-star certified buyers program, meaning that if the buyer was certified with 5 stars, that the seller could have confidence that these people were serious, committed, and had the ability to not just buy the house, but close the deal. So how would you make the point? How would you make sure that the seller was really sort of looking at that offer and saying, hey, this one's really good? So let me run through the 5 stars. First of all, the buyer needed to be willing to give a larger deposit than normal. So if it was customary in that market to get a $5,000 deposit and they had enough money saved up that they were going to be using towards the down payment, we would apply more of that with the offer to make their offer more attractive. Now let's assume, just for argument's sake, there's 5 offers on the property. All of them are relatively the same price, but all of them have $5,000 deposits except one who has a $25,000 deposit. Which one is the seller going to put up at the top of the pile and have more of a discussion about? See, it wasn't meant to get them more for the house, or what it was really meant to do was just to get them to take a harder look at the offer. The second star was to have a commitment letter from a lender that says not only are these people pre-approved, but we're confirming they can afford to buy this house, assuming the appraisal comes in. Now, it's not exactly as good as a cash offer, but boy, it's darn close, because it really says if we can come to terms, the bank's willing to lend this buyer the money to close. The third star was a warranty. Now, when you think about it, there are, Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will. How many times have I seen in my career where, we got a deal signed, and between the time that the deal was signed and the deal closed, something happened to the air conditioner or the furnace or maybe some of the appliances that just complicated the seller's life, things they had to get fixed before closing. And, there's enough stress with moving as it is. So in this particular 5-star program, what they're suggesting is the buyer should buy a warranty. Once the deal is accepted, even if it's not firm yet, the warranty kicks in and will cover the buyer and seller to closing and then cover the buyer after closing when they move in. So really it says to the seller, look, if we have a problem, don't worry about it. I've got an insurance policy that says it's going to get fixed. The fourth star was moving expenses. Now everybody has some expenses. Sometimes you're doing it yourself, sometimes you're hiring people. But what if the buyer was willing to assist you in the cost of your moving expenses? $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. It adds a lot to the bottom line, but it doesn't affect the top line on the offer. That's the beauty of this. So they'd be willing as part of the disbursements to include some money towards the seller's expenses. This is very attractive. When you look at all the other offers, here's a little something extra, and it's different. Now let me give you the fifth star, and this is the zinger. This is the one that always gets everybody. What if the buyer was willing to pay some or even all of the real estate commission? I mean, under the traditional deal, the seller pays the commission. It comes out of the proceeds. What if the buyer said, not only will I give you, you're asking $400, but I'll give you $400, but instead of you taking $24,000 to pay the agents, what if I was to pay the agent? So it's in a sense, it's like giving them $424,000, but it says $400,000 on the offer because the net is going to be that much bigger. It's really about the net proceeds. Now, why is this so important? Because when you add up the fact that they've got a big deposit, it says, hey, I'm serious. It says I'm pre-approved. You don't have to worry about the mortgage. If something happens, we got you covered under the warranty. I'm willing to contribute towards your moving expenses just as a little perk, a couple of $1,000. And I'll pay the real estate commission. Let's say it was $24,000 with the moving expenses, it's $26,000 on a $400,000 sale. That's like getting $426,000. But it doesn't mess with the appraisal price. That's the beauty of this. The banks love this because, of course, the purchaser is more invested in the property and they have less exposure. The appraisers love it because it doesn't complicate stuff. The seller loves it because they walk away with more net. Who wouldn't like that? And the buyer likes it because it gives them a leg up. It gives them an advantage. And everybody feels good because they paid the asking price. They feel like they did okay, even though the net's a little bit different. Now, I got to tell you, when you present this to the listing agent, they'll probably, in most cases, never seen anything like this, and it's going to confuse them. I got that. So what we did was we included a letter that you can use, like a precedent. Now, I want you to, customize it, add your logos and that sort of stuff to it. But what I want you to do is submit this with your offer and make sure the listing agent knows that this is a great offer and it's unique, something that they've never seen before, and their seller's going to want to take a second look at it. That's the success here, to get the seller to stay and take a second look at this. We want your offer in play. Now, whatever you do with any of this stuff, since it's not something you're familiar with, my strong recommendation is that you, before you present this offer and before you proceed, that you spend time with your managing broker, your broker in charge, your broker of record, whoever you report to go over the whole transaction so that they're on side with everything you're doing.